My stepmother Lauren looked me dead in the eye 4 years ago, her voice dripping with venom, and told me that from that moment on, I did not exist to her or my father. Those words burned into my brain. Fast forward to the morning of my 18th birthday. Red and blue lights flashed across the concrete of our Sacramento driveway. A police officer shoved Lauren's head down, forcing her into the back of a squad car. The metal handcuffs clinked against the door frame. She screamed, thrashing against the restraint. Her perfect suburban mask completely shattered. I stood on the porch with my arms crossed, the cold morning air biting my cheeks. I kept my mouth shut and watched her world collapse. I survived her rules for 4 years. Then I turned 18, and I made her a convicted felon. My mother poured her soul into our Sacramento home. She laid the ceramic tile in the sunroom with her own hands. She picked the pale yellow paint for the kitchen because she loved how the morning light caught the walls. After she died, the house lost its warmth. My father, Daniel, could not handle the silence, so he brought Lauren in to fill it. Lauren did not just move in. She launched a hostile takeover. She arrived with her daughter, Ashley, and immediately began erasing every trace of the woman who built that home. The boxes appeared first. Lauren packed away my mother's photographs, her favorite books, and the hand-knit throws she kept on the sofa. When I confronted my father, begging him to stop the erasure, he sighed heavily. He told me to stop living in the past and ruining his new marriage. He chose his comfort over my grief. I became a ghost in my own childhood home. Lauren treated me like an unpaid maid, leaving her dirty dishes on the counter and assigning me endless chores. To buy my own groceries and basic supplies, I took grueling night shifts at a local diner, coming home exhausted, my clothes smelling of stale grease and bleach. Meanwhile, Ashley lived like royalty. She openly wore my mother's vintage gold wedding band, claiming it was just a retro fashion statement. They paraded around the neighborhood playing the perfect blended family. One Sunday, Lauren hosted a lavish brunch for the neighbors. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching her stand in the sunlit kitchen, drinking mimosa from my mother's favorite floral mug. She gestured toward the vaulted ceilings, boasting to the neighbors about how she had personally designed the open floor plan. Bile rose in my throat. She was stealing the credit of a dead woman. They broke me down that day. Today, I am the one holding the hammer. 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, I took a bus across town to the polished oak office of estate attorney Sarah Reynolds. My mother was not foolish. She knew exactly how weak my father was. 4 years ago, she prepaid Sarah's legal retainer to set a trap. Sarah slid a thick folder across the desk. The paperwork proved that the house, valued at $850,000, and a cash account of $150,000, were held in an ironclad blind trust. Daniel had absolutely no legal claim. Total control would transfer exclusively to me at 1 minute past midnight on my 18th birthday. The only requirement was my notarized signature at the county clerk's office at 8 o'clock in the morning on my birthday. I rode the bus back to the house with a fire burning in my chest. When I walked through the door, Ashley smirked and deliberately kicked my freshly washed diner uniform onto the dirty floor. A week earlier, I would have yelled. I would have demanded an apology. Instead, I smiled. I picked up the shirt, brushed off the dust, and walked to my room. Their petty bullying meant absolutely nothing. I held the ultimate execution order, and silence became my heaviest weapon. Every insult they threw at me just fueled the anticipation of their ruin. The morning of my 18th birthday arrived. I left the house before sunrise. met Sarah at the county clerk's office, and signed the release forms. The ink dried, the clerk stamped the deed, and the house officially became mine. I drove back to Sacramento and walked into the kitchen. Lauren stood by the island, sipping her coffee. She smugly pointed to a stack of cardboard boxes near the door, telling me I was legally an adult and it was time for me to pack my bags. I reached into my bag and pulled out the freshly stamped deed, dropping it flat on the granite counter. I dropped the formal 30-day eviction notice right on top of it. Lauren stared at the documents, the color draining from her face. At that exact moment, Sarah Reynolds stepped through the front door. The attorney stood tall and formally informed Lauren that her presence was no longer legally permitted beyond the 30-day window. Before Sarah left, she pulled me aside, her voice dropping to a low whisper. She warned me that desperate people do incredibly stupid things when backed into a corner, advising me to watch my back. Lauren was drowning in panic. I later learned she had secretly racked up $40,000 in credit card debt funding Ashley's pageants and luxury lifestyle. Eviction meant absolute bankruptcy and public humiliation. Instead of packing, she decided to burn the ship down. She researched accidental water damage claims, planning to stage a disaster to secure a massive insurance bailout from the joint policy she shared with my father. I anticipated her sabotage. I used my diner tips to buy a battery-operated cellular trail camera. I hid it inside a box of old junk in the attached garage, aiming the lens directly at the main utility panel and the exposed plumbing lines. The night before the eviction deadline, the house was eerily quiet. Lauren sneaks into the garage. She gripped a heavy steel pipe wrench. She violently smashed the main water valve and ripped the cross-linked polyethylene pipes from the wall. Water blasted across the concrete slab. She then swung the wrench into the electrical panel. The entire house went pitch black. I sat on my bed in the dark, watching the live feed on my phone screen. Lauren stood in the flooded garage, a victorious smile stretching across her face in the shadows. She thought she had just secured a massive insurance check. Suddenly, the garage door flew open, the automatic motor grinding loudly. Blinding tactical flashlights hit Lauren right in the face. I stood in the driveway with 2 Sacramento police officers. Because Lauren had been increasingly hostile, I had requested a routine civil standby for the midnight eviction deadline. The officers were already sitting in their cruiser at the end of the driveway when the pipes burst. Lauren dropped the wrench, the heavy metal clanging against the wet concrete. I stepped into the light. I told her I had canceled the joint insurance policy at exactly midnight the night before. There was no insurance company to defraud. She had just committed felony malicious mischief and destruction of private property. Her eyes widened in absolute terror. She shrieked, backing away from the officers. Slipping on the flooded floor, she screamed for Daniel, begging him to fix it, begging him to stop the police. The officers grabbed her arms, wrenching them behind her back. The metal cuffs ratcheted tight. Neighbors stepped out onto their porches, pulling their robes tight against the chill. Watching the perfect suburban wife get dragged into the flashing red and blue lights in her soaking wet pajamas. The immediate aftermath inside the house was completely silent. Daniel stood by the front door, gripping his single suitcase. He looked at me, his eyes wide and pathetic, finally realizing his wife was a felon and he had nowhere to sleep. He begged me to let him stay in the guest room. I handed him a heavy-duty black trash bag for the rest of his clothes and recited the address of a cheap motel off the highway. I closed the door in his face and locked the deadbolt. Ashley, stripped of her stolen funds and her mother's maxed-out credit cards, faced a brutal reality check. 2 weeks later, I walked into the local diner to pick up my final paycheck and saw Ashley standing awkwardly by the register, filling out an application for my old minimum wage shift. She refused to make eye contact. Lauren's arrogance finally met the justice system. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in state prison. The court also ordered restitution for the damages to the garage, locking her into financial ruin. The community chatter was swift and unforgiving. The neighborhood group chats exposed her fraud, and the women she used to host for brunch treated her name like a disease. She lost her freedom, her reputation, and her marriage. Her felony conviction legally barred her from claiming a single cent of spousal support in the inevitable divorce. I stood alone in my mother's sunlit kitchen, the silence finally feeling like a blanket of peace instead of an empty void. Months later, a wrinkled envelope arrived in the mail. The return address bore the stamp of the state correctional facility. Lauren wrote 4 pages of manipulative garbage, claiming she still viewed herself as my mother, begging for forgiveness, and insisting she only broke the pipes because the stress of the family was too much to bear. She wanted a reaction. She wanted my anger. I read the letter once, folded it neatly, and dropped it into the kitchen trash can. I did not write back. I did not call. Her words were just a hollow echo from a ghost I had already exorcised. I began to rebuild. I surrounded myself with a chosen family, friends from the diner who knew the value of hard work, mentors from my new college classes, and people who respected boundaries. My home filled with laughter and warmth, replacing the sterile, anxious energy Lauren had infected it with. Healing does not come from apologies. Healing comes from the absolute absence of the people who hurt you. If you are watching this and you recognize the signs in your own life, you need to understand the architecture of toxic dynamics. My father suffered from the passive protector syndrome. The weak enabler is often more dangerous than the active abuser because they weaponize your hope. They make you believe that if you just stay quiet, if you just endure a little more, they will finally stand up for you. They never will. Lauren was a textbook narcissist. People like her do not want your belongings or your money. They want your total submission. I learned 3 absolute rules through this nightmare. Rule number 1, silence is the heaviest weapon you can wield. When you react to a narcissist, you feed them the drama they crave. When you starve them of your emotional reaction, you force them to panic. Panic leads to reckless mistakes, like committing a felony in a garage. Rule number 2, blood is a biological fact, not a moral obligation. Society will try to guilt you into forgiving toxic family members just because you share a last name. Protecting your peace requires absolute ruthlessness. You do not owe your sanity to someone who demands your destruction. Rule number 3, the best revenge is not waiting for karma. The best revenge is a legally binding boundary. Karma is a comforting thought for the passive. Smart people rely on contracts, hidden cameras, and the penal code. Apologies mean nothing without consequences. Look at the people in your life who demand your endless patience and constant sacrifices. Are they asking you to love them? Or are they asking you to shrink so they can feel big? You have the power to change the locks on your life. Let me know in the comments when you finally decided to stop shrinking and took your power back. Wow. Let us just take a collective breath after that one. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are probably thinking, why on earth did she wait 4 long years? Why did she let that stepmother treat her like an unpaid maid in her own childhood home without fighting back? To understand that, we have to talk about something psychologists call the slot machine effect, also known as intermittent reinforcement. Megan was not weak, and she certainly was not stupid. When you are trapped in a toxic family dynamic, especially with a passive enabler like her father, you get addicted to the crumbs of hope. Every now and then, the enabler might give you a sympathetic look or a soft word behind closed doors. and your brain treats it like hitting the jackpot. It keeps you pulling the lever, hoping that this time they will finally stand up for you. But the moment Megan accepted that the jackpot was never coming, the emotional spell broke. She stopped playing their rigged game and started building her own. And that brings us to the financial self-defense of this story. Megan executed an absolute masterclass in strategic boundaries. Let us break down the street-smart moves she made to secure her freedom. First, she used the audit strategy. Megan stopped arguing about feelings and looked at the cold, hard paperwork. Her mother's blind trust was the ultimate trump card. Toxic people thrive in emotional chaos because they can manipulate tears and guilt. But you cannot manipulate a notarized county deed. Megan shifted the battlefield from emotional to legal. Second, she focused on building the case. Megan knew her stepmother was financially desperate, and desperate people do not play fair. She did not rely on a he said, she said argument. She bought a battery-operated trail camera and requested a civil standby from the local police department. She built an undeniable, tamper-proof chain of evidence. Finally, she executed the trap. By canceling that joint insurance policy at exactly midnight, she removed the financial safety net before the stepmother even picked up the wrench. That is the fundamental difference between getting revenge and getting justice. Revenge is screaming at someone or keying their car. Justice is letting them willingly commit a felony on camera while law enforcement is already parked in the driveway. Here is the bottom line. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. And you can never outlove a narcissist. But you can outsmart them. Your peace of mind is your most valuable asset. And sometimes you have to legally evict the people who are trying to bankrupt your spirit. They tell you that the narcissist is the most dangerous person in a toxic household. They warn you about the explosive rage, the gaslighting, and the calculated cruelty, but they rarely warn you about what happens to the passive enabler when their shield is finally locked behind bars. When Lauren went to state prison, I thought the infection was completely gone. I renovated my mother's sunroom. I ripped out Lauren's ugly. Pretentious curtains and let the Sacramento morning light pour back into the house. I was 20 years old, paying my own property taxes, and finally breathing clean air. But toxicity does not just evaporate, it mutates. When a parasite loses its primary host, it desperately looks for a new one. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was an automated alert from a premium identity protection and title lock service I had purchased the week I turned 18. The alert was glaring red. A hard inquiry had been made on my credit profile, followed by a formal application for a $250,000 home equity line of credit HELOC against my Sacramento property. I did not panic. I sat down at the granite island, opened my laptop, and called my estate attorney, Sarah Reynolds, within 2 hours. Sarah had pulled the preliminary application file from the regional bank. The applicant's name was listed as Megan. The social security number was mine, but the contact email was a burner address. And the routing number for the cash disbursement pointed to a newly opened checking account. Most people would immediately freeze their credit and cancel the application. But Sarah and I had a different philosophy. If you merely block a rat from entering your house, it will just chew through another wall later. You have to let it walk right into the trap. Through a private investigator, Sarah kept on retainer. We traced the IP address of the loan application. It originated from a cheap monthly rental apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The lease was signed by 2 people, Daniel and Ashley. It all made perfect, sickening sense. When Lauren was packing away my mother's life, my father had access to all the family filing cabinets. He had quietly kept my old tax returns, my original birth certificate, and my social security card. Daniel, the man who spent 4 years staring at the floor while his wife treated me like a servant, was now colluding with his stepdaughter to steal $250,000 from his own flesh and blood. They were drowning in poverty, and they decided my mother's equity was their life raft. I told Sarah to let the application proceed. I wanted them to sign the final closing documents. I wanted it to cross the legal threshold from a mere inquiry into federal bank fraud and aggravated identity theft. 2 weeks later, the bank scheduled an in-person closing for the loan at a local notary office. Sarah coordinated directly with the bank's internal fraud division and the Sacramento County Financial Crimes Unit. I parked my car across the street from the notary office and watched through the tinted windows. At exactly 10 in the morning, my father walked through the glass doors, wearing a wrinkled suit that used to fit him when he lived in my house. Ashley walked in right behind him, wearing cheap sunglasses and a blonde wig, holding a fake ID they had undoubtedly paid a premium for on the dark web. They actually thought they were criminal masterminds. They thought they were about to walk out with a cashier's check for $250,000. 10 minutes into their appointment, 3 unmarked police cruisers silently pulled up to the curb. 5 plainclothes detectives stepped out and walked purposefully into the building. Sarah and I got out of my car and followed them inside. When I pushed open the door to the conference room, the scene was pure cinematic poetry. Ashley was frozen, holding a luxury pen halfway to the dotted line, her fake ID sitting on the table. A detective was reading her Miranda rights. My father was backed against the wall, hyperventilating, his face the color of wet ash. Daniel looked at me, his eyes wide with that same pathetic, helpless expression he used to wear when Lauren was screaming at me. "Megan," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Megan, please. You don't understand. I have nothing. I'm living in a roach-infested studio. Ashley is working double shifts just so we can eat. We were going to pay it back. I'm your father. You owe me for raising you." I walked slowly up to him, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. The room fell dead silent. I looked at the man who had let a stranger erase my mother, who had let me scrub floors to buy my own food, and who had just tried to steal my future. "You didn't raise me, Daniel," I said, my voice so cold it practically froze the air between us. "My mother raised me. You just occupied space in her house. You chose your comfort over my survival 4 years ago. Today, I am choosing my future over your freedom." I turned my back on him. I didn't stay to watch the handcuffs click, but I heard them. It was the exact same metallic sound I heard on the morning of my 18th birthday. The legal fallout was absolute. Because the attempted loan was over $250,000 and involved a federally insured institution, it triggered severe felony charges. Ashley, at 22 years old, was slapped with identity theft and wire fraud. She took a plea deal for 4 years in a federal facility. Daniel, the tragic enabler, the man who always played the victim, was sentenced to 5 years for conspiracy to commit bank fraud. I walked out of that notary office and drove back to my house. I made a cup of coffee, sat in my mother's sunroom, and finally felt the heavy book of my childhood snap shut. If you are watching this, you need to understand a vital psychological concept called the parasite shift. We are conditioned to believe that the enabler in a toxic family is just a helpless hostage to the abuser. We feel sorry for them. We make excuses for them. We say, "Oh, they just don't know how to stand up for themselves." That is a dangerous, late hell lie. Enablers are not victims. They are silent partners. They outsource their cruelty to the narcissist so they can keep their hands clean. But the moment the narcissist is removed, the moment the enabler faces actual hardship, they will suddenly adopt the exact same abusive tactics. Daniel didn't steal from me because Lauren told him to. Lauren was in prison. Daniel stole from me because beneath his passive, pathetic exterior, he felt just as entitled to my destruction as she did. Have you ever had to draw a hard, legal boundary with a toxic family member? Drop your story in the comments below. We read every single one. And your experience might just be the survival guide someone else needs today. If this breakdown helped you see your own situation a little more clearly, hit that subscribe button. Stay safe. Stay smart. And I will see you in the next one.